Welcome to another episode of RIA Collective. I'm your host, Charlie Van Derven. I've got a great guest today. And so when I'm booking guests for RIA Collective, most of that starts with either referrals or LinkedIn. And I'm looking for a few specific things. Our guest today has seen a lot in our industry going back to the late 80s. I don't want to date you, Stacey. Really late 80s. We'll say that. I got a funny story about that in a second too. I don't want to date you, Stacey, but I do want to emphasize the longevity you had. And you've been in so many channels in our industry that no doubt when I saw your profile, I reached out to you because you've one of the things we want to bring to the listening audience is there are so many options for your financial services career, right? You go to the career fair and UBS and Merrill Lynch is there and you think that that's the path. Man, we've all done it a little bit differently. And so Stacey Hyde, welcome to RIA Collective, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, you've got a great story. We got to know each other a couple of weeks ago over a 30 or 45-minute phone conversation. And the experience I thought I saw on LinkedIn didn't match up with what's actually there, Stacey. So you shared so much with me about your path to forming your own RIA and all the steps along. I'm sure I'm going to learn even more about you today, but you got a wealth of information to bring to our listeners. So again, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
So here's my funny little anecdotal story about, I dated you a little by saying you got started in the late 80s, and we'll ask about that. Ernst Young, and I mean, it
was Ernst and Winnie when I started.
I was going to say not even names that aren't even around anymore, but Ernst and Winnie. I don't even know if I heard that before, Stacey. So here's the funny story, right? So I was traveling last week in Pennsylvania. I hope it's funny. I don't know. It's funny to me. I was traveling last week in Pennsylvania and Delaware, and it just turned out that the timing was right to meet up with a friend in DC to go see the Red Hot Chili Peppers playing at Nationals Park and at the stadium in DC there. And we're recording this, September 14th. That must have been like September 8th or something. So just last week we saw them. And we had to take the metro from where we were staying into the park. And we didn't know exactly where we were going. So we asked somebody and they said, yeah, you go this way to Nationals Park. Are you going to the Chili Peppers? We're going to the Chili Peppers. They were younger than we are. Just for reference, I turned 50 yesterday. So
happy birthday.
Thank you. So, we get on the subway with these guys, nice guys. They're, we're chatting a little bit. And one of the young, they're all about 30. One of the guys says, well, did you see him in the 90s? And he kind of smirked at me like, he's calling me old, Stacey. And I had to say to him, nope, the 80s. So I dated myself a little bit that way too. So anyway, I got to chuckle out of it. I hope everybody else did too. It dates us a little bit, but tell me about that first job, right? I mean, you get into this industry, was that a conscious decision? Were you just looking for a job? Was it really, I want to be in financial services, or you just kind of happened into it?
I had a degree in finance from Ole Miss, go Rebels. And I had interviewed with a bunch of the banks, but that didn't really seem like the right fit. Exxon offered me a job in Houston, but actually at the time, my mom was sick and ultimately she wound up passing away that summer from cancer. And so I wanted to be in Memphis, or so I thought. So at the time, Ernst and Winnie, the predecessor to Ernst and Young, offered me a job in their consulting area, and they paid a lot more. I was like, wow, this is great. Little did I know when they handed me a legal pad that said Ernst and Winnie's, evenings and weekends, whatever it takes. I should have figured out my hourly rate. I would have been better off with the bank job.
Yeah. To bring you in, young person, right?
Uh-huh.
And it must be kind of a grind. They're getting everything out of you that they can.
Yeah, it was a great experience, though, from the standpoint of learning how to work with others, learning how to check your work, and really just an introduction to, at the time it was Big 8, then quickly became Big 6, and now the Big 4 accounting firms. And so we were the weird consultants up on, one floor higher than everybody else, who kept, vampire hours during the week, but rarely worked weekends. So.
Well, at least you got your weekends.
Yeah.
Well, very cool. Well, that's a great place to enter the industry. But of course, you didn't stick there all that long.
No, I was there 5-6 years, and then left and kind of meandered a little. kind of did bank-owned life insurance for a year. If I thought that doing municipal finance transactions was boring, bank-owned life insurance was even more so, and wound up working for a local financial planning shop and actually learned a ton there. Great experience. And then went to work for an insurance company. That was definitely not my favorite thing. And then moved over to doing investments insurance for a regional bank.
Okay. So there was a little bit of movement earlier in your career. Do you think that set you up well? I mean, was it good to learn from those different locations, or, was it difficult moving into new roles? Speak through that a little bit, because I think a lot of people, they get out of college, they get their finance degree, they land at a firm, and they're there for 20 years. Right. And yeah,
that was, I was definitely on a fast track because, at 25 years old, I was already a manager. So at the time, I think I was the youngest manager in the Ernst & Young system.
Wow.
And so, but I hated my job. I didn't want to do it. And it was interesting because when I went in to resign, the partner said I couldn't quit because I was the best they ever had at it. And all I could think was, if I can be really good at something I dislike this much,
right,
certainly if I can find something that I enjoy, I'm not going to be terrible.
Yeah. Well,
and it was hard because when you get to one of those big firms with the big reputations, they tend to pay pretty well too.
Sure.
And so you almost have the golden handcuff.
Yes.
So I actually took a series of pay cuts and then worked back up because I knew that I needed to do something different, and I knew I didn't have the knowledge. So I took a pay cut in order to learn.
Well, that says a tremendous amount about you and who you are as a person, right? Because I think a lot of people, the golden handcuffs, right? You get into a certain lifestyle, it's difficult to leave that high paying job. So even if you're miserable, you can justify that by, whatever you're doing with that, growing wealth, if you will. So that says a ton about you as a person. Also, you as a manager at 25 years old, and in such, and now, it's still a male dominated industry, right? I think if we're talking about wealth managers, I think women make up about 15% at this point. I can't, just not too many years ago, that stat was 10 or 11%. If we go back to the late 80s and early 90s, I mean, that's single digits.
Yeah, it was that all the partners were male at the time I was there in the Memphis office.
Yeah. Wow. So that's awesome. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about, not only we'll kind of cruise through the career piece of it, because I want to get to the advice that you have. It's not all about just the history, but that, of course, that kind of lays the pavement for the advice to come. So, I mean, I'm, I don't know. I think you're cool. I thought you were cool when we chatted a couple of weeks ago. I think you're cooler now, but the fact that you would sacrifice the high paycheck for life, for peace of mind, if you will, or for mindset, and climbing ranks in a even more male dominated industry, decades ago. So kudos, Stacey. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was an interesting place. And like I said, I learned a lot, and I was glad when I left. It actually took a terrible job, but it led me to meet people that kind of bounced me over into the financial planning world.
Is that the job we were just discussing?
No, the bank-owned life insurance. Yeah, that was terrible.
Yeah. And you had mentioned the independent broker dealer. So you learned a lot. I had a job with a company when I first got into this industry that was a good company, lots of great people, lots of learning lessons on how not to do things.
Yeah.
You learn instead of learning from the positive that they instill, you go, oh gosh, don't do it that way. Look at how bad they did that. Right. So.
But you also, and I didn't really know anything at the time. When I was at Ernst & Young, I got my CPA license and I started my CFA. And then at the kind of the 1 year stint at doing bank-owned life insurance, I got my CFP, I got my second part of my CFA. And then when I was at Compass, I finished everything up.
Cool. So were you then in wealth management roles prior to joining the bank side?
Yes. When I was with Compass, the local independent broker dealer. That's where I was basically, I guess you'd call it an associate advisor role, although that wasn't what it was called then, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So support staff, but on the wealth management side. I'm curious, Stacey, what's different when you look at, working the wealth management side and an independent broker dealer versus an established bank in Memphis? How did your life change when you made that transition?
I don't know that it changed too much because especially early on in the bank channel that I was in, it was very product driven. Like they'd have mandatory, you'd have to go show up for this product pitch or that product pitch. And that was kind of similar to the independent broker dealer because the owner really got excited when different people would come in showing a product he could sell. And whereas our mindset today is the product's kind of irrelevant. We're trying to figure out what is keeping you up at night, where are you stuck, and then move past that. And the products are almost an afterthought.
Isn't that amazing, the transition that, you to a greater degree, me a little bit lesser, but the transition we've witnessed in this industry over the last 20, 25 years I think that's kind of a microcosm what you just said, right? It was so product focused. Now it's so client focused. And of course, we're going to talk about your RIA, Envision Financial Planning here in just a bit. But the ability to serve client versus serving the firm is a conversation I like to have, because I really think when you're in kind of a bank environment, a captive environment, a lot of what you're providing clients is on behalf of the firm, as opposed to maybe necessarily what's the absolute best thing for the client. Does that echo your experience?
I think that's true. We didn't have too much of a push, but like I remember during the financial crisis, and there was a lot of concern about banks going under. Yeah. We were not supposed to remind clients about being over FDIC limits. But of course I still did and there was some other products that they were coming out and trying to get us to push. And my husband's in real estate, and I got him to look at the offering documents, and he said, I see how the company that's offering this makes money. I don't see how your clients do. I would recommend staying away. And I did, and he turned out to be pretty spot on that. And so it's having that just sort of, I hear what you're saying, but at the end of the day, I answer to, my clients, and they're just really nice people. And that, as I have migrated away from the banks to having our own firm, it's also given us the freedom to say no to certain clients. Like, I don't think we're a good fit. Or we don't offer, you want somebody who's going to pick a hot stock. That's not me. There's people out there, and you can go find them on Twitter, but that's not what we are about. We're about, what are you trying to do, and what's the next best step?
Yeah, and it creates such a purity in the relationship. It's a fun industry, it really is. And and it's the regulations have become so heavy in the decades, in recent decades. It's just fun to watch the evolution, even with the way that we price from commission to fee based, and now a lot of advisors going subscription based, and I don't know, interesting, always changing, always exciting. And you drive a lot of that. So you kind of left the bank side and formed a partnership. Talk a little bit about that. I know that, we're going to talk about the split of that at some point here, but so
we left. I was at one bank, and I had sort of a quasi business partner, and we left to start the wealth management group for a local bank that had never done it. And at the time, I had decided I was going to just go out on my own, but a former coworker had gone over there and convinced us to talk to the management of that bank, and we did, and we made the decision to go in that route. And I think that what happened over the 9 years is I kept steadily moving toward more advice centric and wanting to do things a little bit different, that it just, even to the size of like the TV screens that we had in the conference room to show our clients, we were getting pushback from bank management, like we shouldn't be doing that. I was like, I don't understand. We're doing financial planning. They need to be able to see the numbers.
Yeah.
And they're like, you shouldn't be showing them numbers. It's like, okay, I don't understand.
Yeah.
And so, and my former partner, one of the most wonderful human beings on the planet, but he just really was more in sort of the traditional investment type role, wanted to talk about investments. And that really was not where we were going. And I'd always wanted to have my own firm. And so in November 2019, made that jump. Scariest thing I've ever done.
Yeah, no doubt. And maybe you can hear it a little bit. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. But if you're just listening, I'm clapping right now. So you said a mouthful, scariest thing you've ever done. We made a similar change 9 years ago, started Social Advisors, quit the job, jumped in with both feet, sank our personal savings into it. And, luckily 9 years later, we're a statistical anomaly, and have done well with that. But it's a scary, scary leap, right? I mean, all of a sudden you're dependent only on yourself.
Yeah. And you're on the hook for rent and people's salaries and all that kind of, copier laces and yeah.
It's so funny you say copier laces. I had an interview that hasn't published yet, with Rachel Burns, who is in Folsom, California. And she I think Morgan, if I remember right, she went Morgan, Maryland before Morgan, Maryland, then making her leap to RIA. She did it for family health reasons. But one of the things she said is that, the firms always scared us. And here was the thing that they would say is, well, Rachel, you're going to have to fix your own printer. And come to know it, Rachel said she never had to fix a printer. So anyway, I found that humorous, right? It's like there's this ingrained, I don't know, like the preach against that independent side from the captive firm side, right? To the point where, well, gosh, now, yeah, sure, you get a higher payout, but now to what you just said, Stacey, you got your office, you've got your printer, you got staff, you got, whatever. You go from being, an advisor to a bank to a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. I had to figure out how to run payroll too.
Yeah. Well, I outsource
Thank God for QuickBooks.
Yeah. I outsource payroll and accounting, those are not my strong suits. So I know what we're good at. And so we do all the fulfillment, we do all the sales and marketing, but the accounting side, yeah, I got good help for that. But yeah, there's a big learning curve there. Let's talk about that a little bit, because anybody who's going to make that jump is going to have to go through that from producer to business owner, CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about any, payroll and the different components of running the business? What was that learning curve like?
I probably had the advantage coming from being an accountant. Yeah. And my husband is also an accountant. So we had some of that piece of it. But I think what was a little bit overwhelming, at least initially, was just the magnitude of stuff that I had to deal with in addition to dealing with clients, because, didn't really have an office manager or anybody like that initially. So I was, chief cook, bottle washer, advisor, accountant, payroll coordinator, and also trying to get the office furnished. And, luckily it was right before the pandemic, and luckily it came in shortly thereafter. Otherwise we'd probably still be sitting on card tables. Yeah,
exactly. So. Yeah. And I found, we started ours in our master bedroom, my wife and I. Moved, we went from a 3-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom house so we could open up an office. And we actually, our first 2 employees were coming to work in our master bedroom. Now it was, there was no bed in there. It was a conference table and whatever else. Right. But before we got an office, everybody'd show up in my house for work. So, you kind of feel your way through it. I went from, business development roles to same thing. Now I own a business. I got to figure out how these pieces fit together, payroll and everything else that comes along with it. That's a great leap. And it teaches us, I think, a lot about ourselves and resiliency and, cause it's tough until you figure out the processes behind it.
And there was a lot of stuff. And I think for me, the thing that got me through it is I had like a very small group of people who knew what was going on. There were some people at my church. I'm finance elder. There was some folks from that group, and one or two very good friends. And they were, they were really sort of supporting me, praying for me if that was their bent. And it really made it, especially on the day that I actually resigned, I could actually feel it, because my normal, when I resigned, it was not taken well. And my normal reaction to somebody sort of being in my face and yelling at me is usually one of two things. Either I jump back with both feet, or I just start crying. And that particular day, neither of those occurred. I just got really, really calm. And it was like as though I was watching it in slow motion. And I remembered what my husband had said. He's like, you're not going to convince anybody of anything. Just be nice and get out of there. And so that was what I did. And I'm very glad that I had that support, and I'm very glad I was able to get out of there.
That's awesome. And I, from our conversation a couple of weeks ago, I took a guess as to what the title of this podcast episode might be. And what I wrote down is, you're going to be surprised by who comes with you and who doesn't. Stacey, that's a direct quote from you.
Yeah. And I think that was true, not so much on the employee side, although there was one that I thought she would have come and she didn't. Yeah. But on the client side, it was definitely, because there were a couple that were, very good friends with some of the bank management. There were some that had been clients for a while. And I really felt like they were my clients, and they didn't move. And then there were some that I really kind of thought they might have been more bank clients than my clients, and they moved. And so I think you just, you're always going to have a couple on either side that you're surprised about. And then, there was the big group in the middle that it happened exactly like I thought it would happen.
Yeah, that's
and
cool.
I guess the coolest thing for me is more came with me than I thought would. So that was good.
Well, that certainly helps when you're starting a new venture, right?
Yeah, because my agreement was I couldn't call them; they had to reach out to me.
Right.
But luckily, Memphis is probably the biggest small town ever. Cool. I mean, there's you've heard that 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
In Memphis, it's really one, and even if you're new to town, it might be 2.
Well, I heard a stat I've heard is social media makes it like 3.6 degrees of separation now, or something like that, just because we're all intertwined at this point with LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and the like.
Yeah.
So that's the world is getting smaller as we speak.
Yeah. LinkedIn pushing updates on people's job descriptions was quite helpful.
Yeah, well, no doubt. I mean, that's the playground we play in at Social Advisors, as we do a lot of work on LinkedIn and content marketing on LinkedIn. It's a pretty great tool, isn't it?
Yeah, and I probably only barely scratched the surface.
Yeah. Well, it's great tool. Offline, I'll give you more than the surface.
Okay.
We'll dive a little bit deeper. I don't know if are you using Sales Navigator, LinkedIn Sales Navigator?
No.
Oh my gosh, Stacey, best tool I've ever used for business development. Single best. Yeah. Well, offline, we'll talk about it. Like really, honestly, it'll change the way you prospect. It really will. And a lot of it happens, from desktop now. And of course, I love being out and meeting people. I had meetings in Delaware and Philadelphia or in Pennsylvania last week. Been back to one conference, and I love the in-person and the face-to-face. But for efficiency's sake, this thing is awesome. We'll do a quick little tutorial after we stop the recording button here, because it really is. You'll get a lot out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. My clients have really always been my best source of referrals.
That's great. Yeah.
That
says you're doing something, right?
Yeah. And it usually means I'm going to like them because they're referred from an existing client.
Yeah. When I'm coaching, I talk a lot about asking for the right introductions. I don't think most advisors are not very good at asking for referrals. It's kind of an awkward conversation for a lot of people. Some are great at it, don't get me wrong. But for most people, I find that sourcing names, gaining a little bit of social intelligence around who they spend time with, and then finding a way to casually get introduced. whether it's, over something that the common person likes, or, whatever it is, over dinner. So, the referrals I love, because most of them come unsolicited. When they come unsolicited, you're in great shape. So, so that's good. So I want to ask about 2019. What month in 2019 was Envision?
November. It was
November. Right 5 months. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What's that like? I mean, so all of a sudden you're all pumped up, new business, right? A little bit scared, probably figuring out what you don't already know. And then the whole world shuts down for practical purposes.
We had been a little concerned about the market in late 2019, early 2020. So we had done something that really helped us. We had gone ahead and we'd reached out to our clients, and we had raised the projected cash distributions that they need. We didn't send them yet, but we went ahead and had freed up that cash sort of preemptively, because we felt like the market had done really well for a long time, and it's probably due for a pullback. And I wish I could say I foresaw the meltdown coming, but I didn't. But we had that. And so once we got the lockdown, which was scary, I had to send people home. We weren't really good at, we had, the advisors had VPN, the support staff didn't. We were trying to get in that. There were some capacity issues. But to be able to tell clients that it's going to be okay, we've got enough money to take care of you for the next, and by the way, you're going to be spending less because you can't go anywhere. Can we maybe reduce that a little bit?
Yeah.
It really helped people just stay calm and stay in their seats. And that's really, to me, that's the hardest part about being an advisor, is keeping people calm when the world and the financial pornography network, as I think of it, is telling them they need to do something. And in almost every case, the answer is you just need to not look and just be calm. We don't know when this is going to stop, but I do know that selling out after the market's already gone down 20% is not the right move. Yeah. And it's going to be okay.
Yeah. And something tells me, just getting to know you a little bit, you've got a calming way about you. Something tells me those clients that just put their trust in you 5 months earlier to move with you in your new RIA, something tells me you didn't have a lot of panic amongst your clients.
I didn't have, you could kind of tell how long somebody had been my client. So the ones that had been with us through the 08-09 crisis, they were like, so I guess I need to sign up for online statements and you'll tell me when they're okay to look at again, which now we're going through that whole conversation again.
Yeah, of course.
Newer clients, you really find out whether you did a good job of figuring out their risk tolerance or not.
I suppose. Yeah, that's a good indicator.
Yeah.
Yeah, if nothing else. So Stacey, you got all this, you got all this experience leading up to the start of the RIA. Now we know you're working your way through, that advisor role into a CEO leadership role within your new firm. Is there anything that, happened with that transition that when you look back on it, you're like, gosh, I wish I'd have done that a little differently?
Well, we gave up so we formed the own firm and we were duly registered at that time in November 2019. In September of 2020, because we didn't have enough going on with the pandemic and everything, we gave up our FINRA licenses, mostly because the whole idea of commissions just wasn't us. Yeah. And we felt like we needed to just formally say we don't do that. And then the next evolution, which we just did this July 1st, was we became our own RIA. And we have been with Commonwealth since, I've personally been with them since November 2010. Cool. So, almost 22 years now. But it just, and we're still with them, but it just gives us more flexibility. And, we were struggling under, turnaround times for social media, and have a podcast and some stuff that we were trying to communicate with clients. And it just sort of simplified that. Plus, since Commonwealth is a broker dealer, you can never say you're fee only as long as you're affiliated with them. Yeah. So by launching our own RIA, we now have that ability and can do that.
Yeah, that's great. And I've got several clients that are Commonwealth advisors. And I'll say that about their compliance. Excuse me. They're slow. Like things don't move fast when you've got to submit to Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Good
They're
firm.
pretty reasonable. I mean, we had one where I was actually recommending against crypto, and they're like, we really don't, you can't say that. I'm like, and they're like, can you just not do this at all? And I was like, no, I'm getting too many questions about it. I need to put something out there. And so we kind of got this funny tightrope walking compromise. And as Courtney, our office manager and also our social media person said, she goes, you do know that crypto peaked the day you said we put out your podcast. So,
well,
like,
yeah, haven't listened to the podcast yet, Stacey. I will. But listen, it sounds like your predictions have kind of come true with, both markets, right?
Yeah.
Or I should say all markets, crypto market, and then, our traditionals. Talk to me about the podcast a little bit. Let's get some press out for that. Let's get some of our listeners, talk to me about what the premise of the podcast is and, what you're accomplishing with that.
So what we're trying to do is, through our wealth management practice, we can't really help everybody just because of the economics of it.
Right.
But I think one thing that is abundantly clear, if you understand the math of compound earnings, is that it's about starting young and it's about avoiding the big mistakes. And so what I was trying to do is to put out, it's called Better Financial Health in 15 minutes or less.
Awesome.
What I'm trying to do is put out a short one topic piece each week to just help people if they've got a question about, Series I bonds, buying a house, setting goals, saving in your employer 401k. So they're short, and they're, I've also talked about markets, what to do in scary markets. And so what we're trying to do is basically build our future client base, because if people do the things that we are recommending in our podcast, they're going to be great clients for us at some point. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with that, because I guess the takeaway I had, and once again, I'm going to date myself, is nobody wants to buy a Cadillac too much anymore because the Chevrolets weren't very good. They were buggy, whereas the Toyotas were, the Corollas were great cars. The Camrys were great cars. So then when they wanted to upgrade, well, of course I want a Lexus because that's their best car. And so we want to try to do that and not alienate those people that, are very difficult, other than maybe through a 401k and some meetings of that nature, but really give people the tools, because early on, it's really about setting habits.
Yeah. Well, that's a great analogy. Right. So, but as you're in a certain stage of life and you can't afford that Lexus or Envision for that matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
You still have the opportunity to provide service and value to hundreds or thousands of people, even though you can only really provide financial planning services for dozens.
Yes.
Yeah. That's awesome. Love it. Love it.
And, the other thing that we've done is, for people that have reached out and wanted to talk with us, I've encouraged them to listen to a couple of episodes before the meeting to let them see if it feels like that we're going to be a good fit. And I found that people have self-selected very well after that, because they kind of find out, oh, she's basically telling me to ignore individual stocks. She's definitely not going to be in this Robinhood type environment.
Yeah. So, and for our listeners, again, Better Financial Health in 15 minutes or less with Stacey Hyde. Stacey, they can get that anywhere they listen to podcasts?
Yes,
cool.
They can. It's on all the streaming platforms.
Awesome. Wonderful. I want to dive a little bit into Envision Financial Planning. I want to learn a little bit about your firm and what your missions and values, and then kind of what your goals are, where you're headed with this machine you're building. I don't want to take the feeling and, I don't want to take the humanity out of it, but, we got a process-driven businesses. Let's start with the name Envision, I mean, it seems like it's got some obvious connotation, but
It
speak to
does.
speak to the decision around that name, Envision Financial Planning.
Well, I think the biggest thing when people are trying to come up with what they want their financial life to look at, it is sort of a visioning, or you're envisioning where you want to be, where you want to go. And what we tell people is that, when you're in your 20s, retirement seems like this very far off space. So all we're trying to do is to help you make the right decision now, and then it's likely to change. Because even personally, if you'd asked me when I was in my 20s, if the place where I want to go most of all is Summit County, Colorado, I would have laughed at you. I mean, at that point in time, I'd been skiing once in my life and didn't really even love it. So it just goes to show that, things change and people change.
Yeah.
And as you help people it's what's been super fun for me with clients that I've had for, 20 years now, is seeing sort of their evolution. We started out saving for this, and then this happened, and then we did this, and it's super fun to sort of see how that evolves.
Yeah.
And it's fun to watch them get excited, because one of the things that I firmly believe in, it's not necessarily retirement. It's when do you become work optional? And it's getting to that point. I've had some clients who've done some of the coolest stuff of their entire careers when they could have quit, because they went into, in many cases, they go into an employer and they're like, okay, I'm done. And the employer's like, you can't be done. And they're like, but I'm done. My financial planners checked the numbers. I'm done. And their employer says, well, if you could design exactly what you wanted to do, what would it be? And I've had at least 5 answer that question, and the employer has said, fine, that's your new job description. And
wow.
It's fun to see that happen, because they have a ball. They usually make, a good bit more money, and they're having a ball because they're doing what they want to do instead of because they have to do it.
Yeah, there's no more financial pressure on it. I mean, great, you're making more money, but you can make decisions without worry or fear of any sort.
Yeah, and
how great is that?
Yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah,
and it's also fun when somebody gets to the end of their rope. And this happened with a teacher client of mine that had inherited some money and really had planned to keep going, but she just got a principal that just, they couldn't work together.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, can I? And I'm like, yeah, I've looked at the numbers. It's okay. You can't go crazy. And she did. And, she still loves to teach, and she keeps her grandkids, and she teaches at this girls' school like twice a month for peanuts. I mean, like less than people make working at, Chick-fil-A, but she likes it. And so she does, and keeps her engaged.
Like what you do for a living, and really what, the purpose for a podcast like this and your podcast, it's about helping people, right? I mean, and I preach that a lot, right? You find yourself in a position where you're working for a firm instead of your client, but it really truly is about helping people. So in her case, in your client's case, the payoff isn't the money. She's got the security of knowing she's got you and, you in her corner, and can now make the impact she wants to make on the people she wants to, wants to touch. That's amazing. That's
fun. What's not as fun is when you have to tell people you're overspending and we need to rein this back. And, that's not nearly as fun, but
yeah, both sides of the coin, right?
Yeah. Empowering people to like give money away or take the trip or to, fly business class, but that's fun.
Yeah. I love that. I've got a good friend who's an advisor in the Detroit area, serves automotive industry almost exclusively. And he talks about all the plans that people share with him in their 50s, let's say, that when they finally retire, never happen.
Yeah.
Right. They retire and, they kind of hang out in the lazy boy and watch a lot more TV.
Yeah. We're trying to, I tell my clients, that you can't retire from something, you have to retire to something.
I love that.
Because if you're retiring from something, your days are going to be pretty empty.
Yeah.
And so you need to figure out where you're going to engage. You know, some people can play golf 5 days a week or 7 days a week. Some people can't.
I can.
I can play tennis on any day that ends in Y.
Yeah.
But you have to have that. But I think back to the connection, I think part of the reason that I love tennis so much is I love the community I've built around it.
Mm-hmm.
And the people I've met and the people that are a huge part of my life through that. Yeah. And, you know, also my church. And I think that that's what we encourage our clients to do, is to figure out those points of connection. And really, because if you've got a busy executive, or you've got, and we see this more with women who stayed home to take care of kids, they kind of, once their kids go off to college, they have to sort of figure out what their connections are and what do I do now.
Yeah.
And so we try to help them do that. And I've also had the ones where high-powered exec retires, wife calls me up and says, I don't care what you tell him, he has to go back to work, because if he is going to use his day to manage me, we're having problems.
Yeah.
And so, you know, a couple of times I've jokingly said, maybe you should start something else. But then they usually quickly figure out that, okay, she doesn't need my help, does she? I'm like, no, she's managed for 35 years to figure out how to order her day and buy what needs to be bought and do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
You need to find something else.
Not that this is new news, but you're partly psychologist.
Yes. Interestingly enough, both of my kids have psychology degrees, and my daughter's working on her clinical psychology PhD. I'm like, don't you want to come work with me? She's like, no, Mom.
No. You're a psychologist, marriage therapist, financial planner, tennis player, podcast host. Stacey, my gosh, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
Tell me about your vision for Envision. You know, is that you mentioned Courtney. What's the team look like today? And then, you know, our listeners really made up of, you know, let's say younger advisors, or at least maybe their second career advisors. They might not be age young, but, you know, they're listening because, Stacey, they want to learn tips and ideas to make their transition to an independent world easier. So there is a possibility that if you're growing Envision, you know, maybe there's people out here listening that want to talk to you.
I would love an associate advisor or two. We definitely need it, because we're kind of hitting capacity on the advisory side.
Okay.
You know, we've got a good sort of back office team, but we definitely could use an associate advisor, somebody who wants to run plans, like to head up a financial planning department, you know, something along those lines. So yes, those two positions we definitely need, because we've got Clay is our chief compliance officer. He also is our CIO. And then we've got Hank Parks is also an advisor, runs his own clients primarily. And then we have an intern, Naya, and then Courtney runs the office, runs social media, make sure that, you know, I'm where I'm supposed to be when I'm supposed to be there, thank God.
Yeah, that's good. She sounds like a very valuable piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, she joined us. She's been here almost a year, and that was one of my better hires. That's
awesome. And I'll tell you, you know, and this is a theme that keeps coming up when I'm talking to folks who have just formed their RIA and now they're trying to put a team together. For me, it's social advisors too. That's the hardest part. It really is. I mean, you can have a vision for a great business, but if you can't back that up with the right talent, you know, it doesn't matter what your vision is.
Yeah.
And so that has been, we have a great team, we really do, but it has been, you know, it's something that we've really worked on I think we made our first hire probably, you know, at about 18 months in the business. So for the last 7.5 years, we've been creating the right team and the right culture, and it gets better and better every time we add to it or change it in any way. But that's the hardest part. That has been for me anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess because we're so protective of our clients, we're pretty particular about who we would bring on in that role. And so we haven't we had somebody kind of come on as a part-time person, and then she just decided that the stress of it was too much for her. And that's fine. And that's why, but we definitely are looking to fill those two roles, like a financial, somebody to sort of do some of the more financial planning preparation, and then an associate advisor that can actually work with clients. And I do want to say, full caveat, no business development responsibilities. The only business development you have is not running people off.
Yeah, there you go. Just being a tractor, not a reject. Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. So, what's the best way to learn more about Envision, learn more about you, get in touch with you?
Through our website. All of our contact information's on there. It's Envision, FP is in financial planning, TN, because we're in Tennessee.com.
Very cool. Very cool. Stacey Hyde, I think you're awesome. We've only had a chance to have 2 conversations, this one being recorded, and who knows where those things go, right? The longevity in the industry, the roles you've played, coming up at a time when maybe 7 or 8% of this industry was female, and not only coming up, but also excelling amongst a highly, highly dominant male counterpart. And the purity to be able to say, you know what, this product-based offering doesn't work for me and my clients. I'm going to take this huge risk in life, and I'm going to do that on behalf of my clients. That's awesome. That's awesome. And that's what that's what we're trying to create with our, with RIA Collective, is I really, this might upset people because I know lots of people at the wirehouses, and in fact, coaching clients of mine. I really think that the only way to be a true fiduciary is to serve clients as an RIA. If you have any firm incentives, if you've got to send so many banking leads to the bank counterpart, or if you've got to open so many households that you're bringing on clients that you don't even want to service just to get your payout on that incentive, those are biases that detract from that fiduciary responsibility of an advisor. So being able to separate yourself from that product-driven world and focus directly on what your clients need the most. Kudos to you. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for playing such an important role.
And I think that one other thing I'd like to say, if we're not completely out of time, is
not at all. No, we got all kinds of time.
You should very much, I think clients have a sixth sense for, do you do what you're telling them to do? So I think it's important as financial planners to keep to all the stuff that we recommend to clients. And because then it's easier to say, yes, I recognize that. And one of the things that I try to come across to my clients is, I'm never going to tell you to buy stuff. I'm definitely going to tell you to take the splurge and take your kids on that trip and spend that time with your family, because that's something that is not going to gather dust or whatever. You're going to have those memories. Now you've got to be smart about it and plan ahead. I don't want it on the credit card 3 years from now, but it's getting to that. I think it's imperative on us as advisors to walk the walk. And, if your personal situation, all your credit cards are maxed out and all your, you're living on fumes, I think it pushes you to maybe not be able to keep your client's interest top of mind because you're trying to get that next sale. And if you are comfortable and you know that your family's going to be fine, no matter what that person sitting across from you does, whether they take your advice or not, whether they become your client or not, you're going to be a better advisor for it's going to help your objectivity.
No doubt.
Because I guess the place where I see it the most is when somebody has an option to take a lump sum or a pension. And in many cases, I've run the numbers 8 ways to Sunday. They're better off with that monthly payout. And I find that a lot of advisors will urge them to take the lump sum because they want to manage the money.
Right. Fees based on that money. Sure.
And so I think if you manage your personal life to where you're fine either way, and you're really laying out to them the pros and cons, I think that you'll be a better advisor for that.
And I can echo that in my personal experience too. When we were young, when we started I mean, literally the conversation with my wife, Carmen, was, Carmen, give me 60 days. If I can't make something work and we can see something coming in 60 days, then I'll go get a job. No problem. Right. Our first few our first few clients were advisors. We were focused on financial services from the moment we started. But then the neighbor says, well, I got a bar. Could you handle some content for social media for me? And I go, again, young company, not positive yet, making revenue, but not covering our expenses yet. Sure, I can do that. Well, 4 or 5 years into this business, I was representing car dealerships, restaurants, bars, some financial advisors, a senior living place. We were a car wash, a local car wash. We were spread. Every client was different, which meant, and every client's still different, but every client can be serviced in a similar way. So we can be a much more process-driven company now. Mm-hmm. Back then, we had a different process for every client. So while the revenue was finally allowing us to start to live our lives again, I was working way too much. The small staff we had, it was just, there was no efficiency to the business. And so it wasn't, really until we got back to our core, which probably happened in, 2017 maybe, where we went, no, we don't do it for all these people. In fact, we fired a bunch of revenue. Mm-hmm. But we were finally in a position where we could say, we don't do all this stuff. We do what we know we do well. And I can't tell you, making that decision, removing all that inefficiency, it changed the business. Like five years later, we're in a much better position than we would have been had we continued down that path. Right. So we were looking for the next deal just to make sure that there was, we were renting at the time, we had to cover rent, and we had one car payment and a couple of little kids. And yeah, there was a lot of stress involved in, we were looking for that next client, to your point. And it changed the way we did things because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So finally at a place now where we can be a little choosier. So that's much better. So,
and you can, and like you said, you let some people go. We did that. We had, a couple of clients that just, quite frankly, weren't nice. And we just had to tell them, I think you need to go elsewhere.
Those are liberating moments, aren't they?
Yeah, they're really scary. And, sometimes people get very negative back at you, like, how dare you? But, then when you realize that phone and that name hasn't shown up and you haven't had that, like, oh, not today.
Yep.
It's just not worth it.
I know.
Especially if they're abusive to your staff, it's just.
That's the point I was going to make. I know it's time when I've heard it from a bunch of staff members, I got 4 calls from this person today and they're pissed off about whatever, and, like, we're not, I'm not a doctor. I'm not saving lives. You are saving financial lives. We are helping advisors help more people. It's a long process, but it's not like anybody has an emergency that has to happen right now. And when they get upset about something because it's been 15 minutes and someone hasn't replied to an email, gotta go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm lucky to be in a position for that. As I'm sure you feel that way too. We're lucky to be in a position to be able to, kind of mold what we're doing going forward, because it wasn't always that way for us.
Yeah.
So anyway, Stacey, it's great. It's great to know you. I'm not too far from Memphis. I get there fairly often, so we'll do coffee one time soon and get to know each other in person.
Well, I listened to one of your other podcasts, and I understand you're a craft beer guy. So we have a dual tap kegerator in our backyard outdoor kitchen.
Oh my goodness!
So if we haven't if you get here before we've winterized it, I'll have you over.
That is awesome. So you listened to the Brian Carney episode?
Yes.
Brian's awesome. I love him too. He was, in fact, that's one of the people I was visiting with in person in Delaware. That's one of the great things about this is you and I were strangers 3 weeks ago, and I'm excited to be in your backyard drinking a craft beer in the coming months here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome, Stacey. Well, we're going to sign off from this episode of RIA Collective. Stacey Hyde, my guest, thank you so much for being here. If you're a listener and you like what you hear, I'd love for you to subscribe, give us a review if you can. That just helps us reach more people and help more advisors. And of course, if you know anybody that's in an RIA leadership position that you think we should interview, or if you're one of those advisors who are in a position that you didn't think you'd end up in and you're looking for independence, Stacey's a great person to reach out to. Or of course, you can reach out to us directly at riacollective.com. Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.